Thank you, Les Concola, for getting the opportunity to raise this very important matter with you, Minister. And I outlined first the deep concern by so many farmers in rural areas, especially in rural Kerry, that have, and basically, Minister, the farmers that talk about rewetting, these are the farmers that actually work the hardest. They drained their land. They were encouraged to do so, to make their land productive. Back in the 60s and the early 70s and through the 80s, they were grant-aided to do that. And they worked very hard to make their land productive. And it's very hurtful now for them to hear people up here in government or advising government or whatever in the name of biodiversity that these lands should be re-wetting, because that will actually spell the end of their livelihoods if that goes through. Now, there has been stalling of it in recent times in Europe, and I believe that there was a vote lost by the people proposing the re-wetting, and there's another vote to take place in the next few days. I was glad to hear the Taoiseach today outlining his view on re-wetting. He said that it should only be voluntary and that farmers would be compensated if they did go for that. I have a problem with that. It's good to hear him saying that in the first place, what he did say. But if a farmer in the middle of a flat, low-lying place decides he wants to flood his place or re-wet it, he will probably re-wet his neighbours on either side of him, maybe one side of him or both sides of him. So you could have, you could have problems because of that as well. And it's unfair, because when you talk about re-wetting, you're only talking about people on these low-lying lands, and then you have people in the Golden Vale, free draining soil, you have mountainy places, they won't be affected at all. So then we have places like the North Kerry, where back in the 40s and the early 50s, there was Arterial Drainage Act of 1945. It helped those people to drain almost 26,000 acres of land, and they're highly productive land. And the communities around there have enjoyed the spin-off from good farming practices back over the years. The villages, the shops, the garages, the entire community. And then there's a proposal to carry out maintenance, and then we have 1,172 submissions from, I won't call them good doers, but the likes of Untashka, Bat Conversation Ireland, Birdwatch, so on. All these groups are aided, funded by the government, and what it actually has meant that they put in professional submissions against what the OPW and the farming community have in view for what they want to do by the way of maintenance, and to ensure that maintenance is continued into the future, because the Cashin outlet has silted up now to more than a metre to what it was. So there's proposals for pumps driven by wind energy, to 16 pumps, and because they can't carry out the drainage in the manner that they have done previously, because that Cashin section is in an SSE.
You get a chance to come back in.
Yeah.
Thanks, Asking and thank Deputy Healy-Rae for raising this matter, taking this on behalf of the Minister for Housing, Local Government, and Minister Noonan as well. So one of the commitments in the EU biodiversity strategy is to put forward a proposal for legally binding EU nature restoration targets, and the proposed draft regulation on nature restoration aims to fulfil this commitment. It's a significant piece of draft legislation will have an impact on all areas of society, not just farming. It will introduce restoration targets across a wide range of land uses through rural and urban areas, including lands in agriculture use, under forestry and the marine. There will be legally binding restoration targets for a broad suite of marine and terrestrial habitats, including grasslands, woodlands, sand dunes, rivers, lakes, peatlands and other wetlands. And this obviously will have policy, legislative and sectoral implications across many government departments, from housing and planning to energy to forestry to fisheries and to water. According to the proposed draft regulation, restoration measures can cover 20% of the EU's land and sea area by 2030 and all ecosystems in need of restoration by 2050. Restoration of habitats does not necessarily mean cessation of current land use, rather is an opportunity to work with landowners around restoration objectives. Relating to the concerns for farmers, I appreciate that there is uncertainty arising from Article 9, which concerns agricultural ecosystems and particularly the requirement to fulfil targets relating to the restoration of drained peatlands in agriculture use. Restoration of drained peatlands does not necessarily bring the water table to surface level, and rewetting is just one of several tools available for restoration of target ecosystems. And the broad definition will allow Ireland to determine for ourselves what rewetting means in our national circumstances. And in terms of the draft targets, there's been a reduction on the original Commission proposal brought about by Ireland's and other countries' participation in the negotiations. And the Commission has confirmed that restoration works underway at the time of when the draft regulation may come into force can count towards overall targets. This would mean that the commitment of over 77,000 hectares of peatland rehabilitation using Bord na Móna lands in the Climate Action Plan, for example, can count towards the overall targets if that work is underway by the time the regulation comes in. And this would obviously have a reduced the demand on landowners, and moreover this without counting the several thousands of hectares of restoration works currently underway and planned by the National Parks and Wildlife Service. Any decision on how much state lands to be used will be a factor in the National Restoration Plan, along with other considerations such as non-peat extraction lands, for example Cuilcha lands, incentives and schemes for voluntary rewetting, etc. And any additional measures needed will be introduced with landowners, obviously in consultation with them, which will be really important. The impact of any measures on the landowner's ability to continue the economic use of their land will obviously be considered, and they'll have to be engaged as part of any national restoration plan. And it's important to flag at this stage that the undertaking of such measures will be voluntary and will obviously have to be fully resourced. The current presidency, the Swedish presidency of the EU, is seeking to establish an agreed approach in time for the Council meeting on the 20th of June. And after that, negotiations at EU level, and the Taoiseach spoke about this early on, will continue with the next Council presidency, engaging with the Parliament and the Commission in overall trilogues around potential agreement on the final text. So there has to be continued negotiations on this over the coming period.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Minister, for the reply. But again, I say to you, this rewetting, considering this, would have a desperate effect on people who drain their lands and successfully have farmed it for many years. Just take the people of North Kerry. It's a vibrant farming community, and the great hurling teams. Kerry has the best football team in the country most years, but we also have massive hurlers and hurling clubs in North Kerry who are really proud of that tradition and proud of their villages like Lishklan, Ballyduff and Abbeydorney and Ballybun and all those places. They're massively proud of their place, but any rewetting proposal or increasing or hiring the level of water in this area would have a disastrous effect on the farmers and the community to exist going into the future, and it can't be considered. And I say to you, Minister, that the farming community are the custodians of the land. They're proud of their places and they want to better them and hand them on to the next generation in a better shape than they got them themselves. And they don't need any dictation from Untashka or Boardwatch or any of these people as to how to run or operate their farms. And they predict, they value biodiversity more so than anyone else. But to ask them to rewet their lands again, and the people around my side of the country, South Kerry, that have worked so hard back over the years, draining their places, it is absolutely criminal to have anyone here, Europe or anywhere else, be deciding that they will or they won't rewet their lands. It's very unfair, Minister, and I'm asking you in government to ensure that this doesn't happen, and you play your role at whatever minister you're in transport, but make sure that you, even though that you are in Dublin, you must talk up for the rural side of our country as well, because they're vital to the well-being of the country, and especially the farmers of Kerry.
Thanks very much, Deputy, and certainly with my previous hat on, I was very familiar, was in Lixnaw with Minister Foley and a great hurling club, and I know benefited from the Sports Capital programme as well. What I would say, just to set out the factual on this, because a lot is being said and publicly, and very much sometimes polarising communities, and what's been very clear is any measures will be introduced with landowners in mind and in consultation with them. That'll be considered in the context of the development of an overall national restoration plan, and it's important to flag again that the undertaking of such measures will be voluntary and will have to be well resourced. And I've already set out in my original answer in the context of the state lands, Board na Móna lands, what the National Parks and Wildlife Service are already doing in terms of nature restoration and improving biodiversity. And the Swedish presidency is obviously trying to conclude this file, and that will allow for trilogue discussions with the Parliament and the Commission to agree the final text. The latest iteration of the proposed regulation, and Minister McConalogue has set this out very clearly, there's been significant flexibility built in because of our negotiations with the European Council and the Commission, and the National Parks and Wildlife Service will continue to work with the EU and with national stakeholders to develop an overall national restoration plan that works for all aspects of society. We need nature and we also need food, and the scientific evidence is definitive. The security of both are interconnected, even more so in a climate changed world, and we should all be mindful of that. And that's why you have got the trilogue discussions, which will try and strike a balance. And as I've said earlier on, and what was said by Minister McConalogue and others, obviously the working with landowners and having any scheme that's voluntary and well resourced, and then the state lands as well. It's about striking that balance from a European negotiation. Thank you.